So, analysts who study bioterrorism and biological warfare agents are always kind of looking for what is a probable dissemination mechanism for these agents. And in some instances, they can think about communal supplies, such as locations where there's high foot traffic to acquire food or other resources such as water. So just going to put this in your minds, something that we want to make sure that we maintain are very good practices in terms of preventing contamination of any resources that are consumed, such as water or food. And so this is going to help kind of segue us into talking about water supplies as well as sewage disposal. So this is a common problem that every society has, is we want to make sure that we have enough water for people to survive, because it's the most essential resource that's necessary. And then we want to figure out great mechanisms that we can use to dispose of our sewage properly without generating a lot of pollution. So typically water is polluted through either biological contaminants or chemical contaminants, okay? Chemicals are things that are produced by us that are released into the water in the form of things like phosphates that come from fertilizers or soap, or really any products that we've generated that contain chemicals and we're finished using them, and so they eventually can leach into the water. Biological pollution are going to be things like our garbage, as well as our fecal material that gets ultimately released into water. One example is that occurred in 1993 of cryptosporidosis, which was an epidemic that took place in Milwaukee. And this was an epidemic that occurred through water contamination. And it was the largest waterborne outbreak that has ever taken place in the U.S. And so what was taking place was the fact that you essentially had sewage being disposed of from a plant that was leaking into water reservoirs. It was leaking into water pumps. It was leaking into streams. And the leakage of this sewage disposal all infiltrated the water. And so other contaminants came from outhouses, and they also came from cows, and essentially what we call feedlot drainage, where you feed cows and they excrete fecal material, and then all of that seeps down into the soil and eventually makes its way to reservoirs. And so this whole system basically was contaminating the water supply, and essentially led to the development of this cryptosporidosis epidemic that took place in Milwaukee. And for this reason, we want to make sure that adequate treatment measures are taken to ensure that water sources are pure and safe for the community to drink. So some major techniques that are used to implement this are called sedimentation, coagulation, filtration, and chlorination, which are processes that are used to filtrate the water, essentially. So the water is being processed to remove the contaminants from it, so that way it's safe to drink. Water is tested for the presence of fecal contamination. This can be as easy as taking a sample of it and growing a small sample of that water on a bacterial agar plate. If you see growth after 48 hours, you know that you have contaminants that are residing in that water. Sewage treatment. How do we go about treating sewage? Raw sewage consists of water, fecal material, garbage, and bacteria. And you have to employ a large number of sewage treatment tactics in order to get that stuff to become treated. And here, diagram outlining the process by which water or sewage treatment undergoes. In the primary stage, what happens is debris is filtered out using skimmers. So things like grease and oil are essentially removed from the from the water being, or from the sewage being treated. Once the stuff has been removed, it's basically shredded, or it's going to be ground up. Then all of the solid material starts to settle out in the next stage where this takes place, which is called the sedimentation tank. So all of that solid material is just going to start to float, or start to settle to the bottom. And you start adding certain substances that can cause other solids to start settling out. So this process uses what's called flocculating substances, and this helps to aid in the separation of the contaminants that are inside of the sewage. So when the material starts to form at the bottom of the tank, you generate what's known as primary sludge. In the secondary sewage treatment, the liquid undergoes the next stage, which is going to include a process of aeration or filtration. And what happens here is we're going to actually use aerobic microbes that can hopefully dissolve organic material into both carbon dioxide as well as water. There's a term called trickling filtration, which is used to convert the organic material into carbon dioxide and water, but it uses a different technique. Once this process is complete, the sludge that is at the sludge at the bottom of the settling tank is going to be moved, and any solid material is going to start to settle. So this will leave over basically an effluent mixture, and that effluent mixture needs to be filtered as well as disinfected. And so this is where we add the process of chlorination, where chlorine will be added to the water, and then the water can be returned to the oceans or to rivers, reservoirs. Now, there is typically a third tertiary sewage treatment strategy, and this can take place in some desert cities where water is in very short supply. The effluent water from the sewage disposal plant receives further treatment, and then once it's treated, then that water is returned to the system where we actually collect the water and we drink it. So sewage treatment this particular tertiary treatment is going to include additional chemicals to treat the water, additional filtration for the water, which can use sand or charcoal to get those chemicals out of, which can be used to get those contaminants out of the water. Distillation can also be a part of this process. Okay, so this is going to conclude our chapter on our epidemiology as well as public health. So there's a lot of key factors and a lot of key concepts that we talked about today. We talked about what epidemiology is. We talked about modes of transmission for viruses and pathogenic bacteria. And we also talked about bioterrorism. We talked about World Health Organization and public health institutes. And then we just finished up talking about wastewater treatment plants. So there's a lot of information that was highlighted in this particular unit. So as always, if you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. Have a good day.